Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your hosts Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and it's just a solo episode today. Austin is on vacation in Florida this week, so hopefully he is living it up down there and having himself a good time. Today, we're just talking about the Divisional playoffs, getting right into the game previews, and I'll touch on some NFL news and Steelers news first, of course. How's everyone doing? Hope everyone's having a great start to their new year, and hope everyone enjoyed what we saw out of what was an entertaining wildcard weekend last week. And as we transition to Divisional weekend, there's been a lot going on in terms of coaching hires, and the most recent of which I'll be talking about. Why don't I just start off with that, with the Dallas Cowboys hiring former Green Bay Packers head coach Mike McCarthy. I'm not sure what people, I think the general, kind of thought process with this is that this was kind of if there is such a thing as a safe hire, this was kind of a safe hire for the Dallas Cowboys. They tried for so long, Jerry Jones and the Cowboys did, to make Jason Garrett work. Garrett was the perfect company man, and ultimately it just didn't work. And this time they're bringing in a guy who is a proven commodity. His style did get stale at the end with Green Bay, but that's still a Super Bowl champion head coach, a guy that's gotten it done before, and he's going to want to do things his way. So it'll be interesting to see, what he can bring to the table with what is undoubtedly a talented Dallas Cowboys team, but more importantly, how long is that relationship going to last? Are things going to deteriorate? Because as we've seen, Jerry Jones's relationships with coaches who tried to do their own thing, the Jimmy Johnsons and Bill Parcells of the world, don't typically last too terribly long. Now, there has been success, but of course that, time will tell how long that might be able to last. And obviously the longer the better for the Cowboys, but I thought it was a good hire, about as good a hire as you can have for Dallas. First glance, I like it better than someone like a Joe Judge, but I also don't know much about Joe Judge. It's interesting, you don't usually see the special teams coordinator going from there to head coach. Everyone's going to point to John Harbaugh as being a kind of trend breaker in that instance, and that's true, but not every special teams coordinator is John Harbaugh either. But, of course, time will tell, and we'll have a lot of time to scrutinize these choices. But with Mike McCarthy signing on to be the Dallas Cowboys head coach, that leaves just one NFL head coaching vacancy in the rest of the league, and that is, of course, the one in Cleveland with the Browns, who had fired former head coach Freddie Kitchens. There doesn't appear to be a signing imminent at this point, with Ron Rivera being the first to go in Washington, Joe Judge, as I mentioned, with the Giants, and Matt Ruley with the Carolina Panthers, and now Mike McCarthy. I'm curious to see who the Cleveland Browns are going to go after. I don't get the feeling that they're going to be trying someone new, kind of like an Eric Bieniemy, and they might try to go for a more established guy, but who? I think they had been trying to interview Josh McDaniels. I think that would be a mistake. I don't really think Josh McDaniels is a good leader, personally. I mean, it has been 10 years, more than 10 years since his last head coaching experience when he was with the Denver Broncos. So maybe he has learned quite a bit from then, but I really hated the way he handled that Indianapolis Colts interview and situation 2 years ago now. And I'd be very wary of that if I was a team looking to hire a coach. That being said, again, some time has passed. Maybe he'd be a better option. But all in all, I'm still not quite sure what the Browns are going to do. And to be honest with you, do they really know what they're doing? I'm not sure. The general, kind of thought process with the Browns is they don't seem to know what they're doing. Dysfunctional teams, as we know, do dysfunctional things. There's also been an issue that's been popping up. Well, really, it's been an issue for a long time, but it's all about the Rooney Rule and the lack of minority head coaches in the NFL. So there are just 4 minority coaches in the NFL this year, or going into next year. There could be a fifth one if the Browns do hire someone like an Eric Bieniemy. But either way, there is not a large number of them. There are, of course, Mike Tomlin, Steelers head coach Brian Flores, the coach of the Dolphins, Ron Rivera, the new coach of the Redskins, and Anthony Lynn, the coach of the Chargers. So, there seems to be some sort of a lack of diversity here at the head coaching position. And for those who don't know what the Rooney Rule is, that's the rule where all head coaching vacancies require that a team will interview at least one minority candidate before making their decision. And while it's rooted in a good idea, its execution has not been very helpful. Of course, the rule helped the Steelers find Mike Tomlin, which, of course, has been very good. But the problem is it doesn't seem to be working throughout the rest of the league. It was very apparent for like 2 years that the Oakland Raiders were trying to get John Gruden, and when they were so dead set on them having the guy that they wanted, it becomes obvious that the minority candidate that they would interview, just like it feels like the Dallas Cowboys interviewing Marvin Lewis was just something to satisfy the requirements of the Rooney Rule. So even though they are fulfilling their duties, it almost feels like they're just checking a box, and that's concerning. So what's the issue there? Are there not enough qualified minority coaches? I don't know that I necessarily believe that. It's an interesting phenomenon because you think about it, most of the players in the NFL, or at least a majority of them, are of, well, in ironic enough terms, minorities, African Americans in particular, and there's only 4 minority head coaches. It's just something, I guess I hadn't really thought about it until recently, but I'm not even sure. I mean, I guess the only thing I can kind of touch on here is that a lot of these jobs seem to be filled by people that generally the people hiring would know, or at least are more comfortable with. That's the best I can kind of come up with. For instance, as I mentioned, the Raiders were very interested in John Gruden. They've already worked with Gruden, obviously, in years past. I don't know. I guess just people that they're more comfortable with. I'm not sure if it's necessarily, racism playing a factor, is more so maybe they just don't work with these, higher profile minority coaches. I'm just honestly, I'm just wondering, I'm not sure. Maybe that's, I don't know. It's interesting. This requires deeper analysis beyond that which I've done. I just kind of came on here knowing that it's something that's creeped up here. And I know that Roger Goodell spoke about it last year, and a year later, after talking about the importance of the Rooney Rule and trying to make sure that there is a greater influence or greater diversity in the league when it comes to the head coaching position, that has not come to fruition. But you have to understand that this would probably take more than 1 year too. So I don't know. It's interesting, but I guess the main thing I'm thinking about is, why is someone like Eric Bieniemy not been given a job yet? He could be the new Cleveland coach, possibly. I don't know at this time. But it makes you wonder where, the special teams and the former special teams coordinator Joe Judge is getting a head coaching position, and guys like Matt Nagy and Doug Peterson, who to my knowledge were not play callers under Andy Reid, were still given high priority. They were highly sought after guys as head coaching candidates. Why is Eric Bieniemy not getting the same thing? It's he's the guy in Kansas City now. He's not calling plays because that's what Andy Reid's doing, but does he not deserve to get a crack at it? I don't know. Just something that I'm kind of thinking about in my head right now, and I wanted to kind of bring up right now because it's something that I'm kind of thinking about as I go, and I kind of want to bounce some of these thoughts off of Austin and see what he has to say about it. But in any case, we'll have more time to talk about that over the course of the off season. What else is going on? The Pro Football Hall of Fame is going to announce its centennial class next week. So They're going to have their traditional class that's going to be announced right before the Super Bowl. But of course, with the centennial NFL season upon us, the Pro Football Hall of Fame is going to have, I believe, a 15 member list that includes players, coaches, and other contributors. And there are, let's see, I think 4 former Steelers coaches, contributors, and players on the list, including safety Donnie Shell, former coaches Bill Cowher and Buddy Parker, and former scout Bill Nunn. So, I mean, theoretically, all 4 of them could be Hall of Famers by this time next week. They're supposed to be announcing that then. I mean, I wouldn't expect all 4 of them to make it. I think Donnie Shell has the best chance of those 4 guys. I think Bill Nunn is probably the most accomplished because he was the scout that found most of the players the Steelers drafted in the 1970s with all those small black colleges that no one ever knew about these really great players, and Bill Nunn found them. And he was a huge part of the Steelers building that team. He absolutely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I think he might be the most deserving of all 4 of those people, including Donnie Shell, but I think he has a tough path considering they only have 2 contributors to make it in, and I think Paul Tagliabue is probably going to get one of them, the former NFL commissioner. So that's a pretty narrow list right there for him to get in, but he's definitely deserving. Bill Cowher, I think he's a borderline guy. I don't know the rest of the coaches off the top of my head, but I think it's going to be tough for him. And then Buddy Parker was mostly a coach with the Packers, I believe. I think he was an assistant with Lombardi. He had a decent time with Pittsburgh, but it wasn't all that great. As far as Steelers news, they signed former LSU safety John Battle and former UB Buffalo wide receiver Anthony Johnson to reserve future contracts. Battle was most recently with the Jets and then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He signed with the Jets as a UDFA and was waived in June and spent the rest of the year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, most of it on the practice squad. Johnson, who was signed by the Buccaneers, was then cut by them after being a UDFA there and spent the remainder of the season with the Los Angeles Chargers. Fun fact, his cousin is Jadeveon Clowney. So those are 2 guys that the Steelers are using to fill up the rest of their 90-man offseason roster. So 2 names to keep an eye on there. Also, some news coming from soon-to-be free agent safety Sean Davis. He said that he's not really interested in a 1-year kind of prove-it deal, which I definitely understand, but it also means he's not likely to return to the Steelers next season. I think we all kind of knew this was a possibility. Davis did say that he wants to return, but at the same time, I have a feeling he's going to want to go somewhere else where he can compete for more playing time. You know, Davis had a very interesting career with the Steelers, assuming this is his final days as a Steeler. You know, he came out, I think he won the Joe Green Award for the Rookie of the Year. He was a strong safety originally a slot corner coming out of the draft. Then they moved him to strong safety. Then they moved him to free safety after his second season. And a lot of up and down with Davis. And, you know, he missed the season opener, and I think he got hurt in the second or third game this year. And, you know, he just never got a chance to really establish himself because he moved around so much. And then Minka Fitzpatrick was acquired, and Davis quickly became the forgotten man. Even if he did come back, I think he'd come back as like the third safety kind of thing. And even if he doesn't do that, say you move him to strong safety, it's another position change for him. I just think this is a situation where both sides are going to need time apart. And as far as how much Davis could make, I think the Steelers would offer him the veteran minimum. I'm not sure how much more he can get. He was not an overly productive safety in his time in Pittsburgh, and unfortunately for him, his worst years, or at least year, came in his last year. So his value is probably as low as it ever will be. So hopefully he gets a chance to make some money and compete for a starting job somewhere else. But if for some reason he ends up having to take a short-term deal and he decides to come back to Pittsburgh, I would not hate that at all. I mean, he wasn't the biggest big play guy, but I mean, he was a hard player, an athletic guy. Maybe a more narrow role would suit him better, and maybe he could end up back too. So I won't close the door on anything just yet, but I still think it's unlikely he returns. So just a quick update on that. And speaking of free agents, we're also going to talk about Nick Vannett, the reserve tight end. His contract is up, and when he was asked about his uncertain future, he said, quote, "I love being a part of it, and I hope I can continue to be a part of this," from Chris Adamski from the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. That quote was from. Vannett probably is not going to make a ton of money on the open market. An average at best number 2 tight end who really did. I think he only caught like 13 passes this year. Really was not a good blocker this year. So, the tight end position is the most interesting one in my opinion going into the offseason. You've got a bunch of back of the end roster guys in Scotland Williamson and Kevin Rader. You've got a former late round draft pick in Zach Gentry who caught, I think, 1 pass this year. Vannett, who's been an enigma, and Vance McDonald, who had probably his worst year with the Steelers, and his future is uncertain too. So with all this uncertainty going into the draft, and there's no guarantee you'll get a tight end you like in the draft, I have to think that either Vannett or McDonald is going to be coming back. McDonald has the option, but Vannett could be brought back for cheap most likely. You'd like to see the Steelers bring back Vannett from the standpoint of they paid a 5th-round pick to get him, but he also was not very good. So Steelers have some decisions to make, but it is good to see that he would like to return. Some sad news to get to now. Former Steelers assistant coach from the 1970s has died due to complications from Parkinson's disease, and that is George Perlis, or Perlis. I'm not sure exactly how you say that name, so I apologize if I got that wrong. He was credited with being one of the founders of the infamous, or famous if you're from Pittsburgh, the stunt 4-3 defense that helped to make the Steel Curtain as great as it was. He came along in 1972, which was Joe Green's first season as the Defensive Player of the Year, and he was later promoted to defensive coordinator in 1978 and assistant head coach in 1979. So George Perlis, dead at 85, rest in peace, and sending all of our condolences to him and his family. Certainly a name that probably not as well known, but still an important part of those 1970s teams as well. So rest in peace, George Perlis. All right, let's move on to the slate of games this weekend. We'll start with the games tomorrow, Saturday, which is going to be January 11th. We've got the 4 o'clock and the night games, the 8 o'clock night games. Starting, of course, with the NFC side, we're going to have the 6-seeded 10-6 Vikings at the number 1 seed San Francisco 49ers, who finished 13-3 this year. So this will be played out in Santa Clara. Let's take a quick look at the injury report. Excuse me. The Minnesota Vikings have just 3 players listed. They have cornerback Mackenzie Alexander with a knee injury. He's out. Safety Jaron Kearse with a toe and knee injury. He's doubtful. And wide receiver Adam Thielen, who's questionable with an ankle injury. The 49ers, on the other hand, have edge rusher D Ford, who's questionable with a quad and hamstring injury. Defensive end Kentavious Street, who was on the injury report, but he is officially out. The 49ers placed him on injured reserve because linebacker Quan Alexander was activated off of injured reserve and will play on Saturday, after tearing his pectoral in Week 9. So he's coming back, so that's great to see for the Niners. He's a big-time playmaker, kind of their Devin Bush, if you will. So that's a big boost to the 49ers' defensive front. So when looking at this game, let's first start with the Vikings. I mean, look, I don't really think anyone gave the Vikings a chance to win last week. Austin and I both predicted that the Saints would win in a blowout, and yet here the Vikings going on the road and win in overtime. Now they're going to be going into what's considered a less intimidating venue. So, do the Vikings have a chance to upend yet another NFC powerhouse? The answer quite simply is yes, but it's complicated on how they get there. The Vikings won with a formula that they've won with all season. They played good defense, and they were able to run the ball against the Saints. They weren't super effective, but they were efficient enough to keep the chains moving, and Kirk Cousins made the big throws that he had to make in order for the Vikings to win. They can do it again. This defense, the 49ers defense is interesting. You think about their defense, and it was really good. just like the Saints defense was really good. But there were times this year where I felt like the Niners defense was at times really, really bad, like worse than the Saints defense, and also more dominant than any defense in the league. It was kind of strange the year they had. The difference is going to be the Vikings' offensive line. Can they hold up in the pass pro, and can they open up running lanes on the ground? This is going to be another big game for Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison on the ground. And Cousins against that 49ers secondary. I mean, I didn't feel great about him last week, but he played a pretty good game, and I think he'll have another decent opportunity to play well in this one. I don't love the matchup, but I'm willing to give Cousins another chance because he showed us that he can play big in the big moments. For the first time in his career, which, maybe it was a one-time thing, but that's a team that believes in itself now more than ever, and that's a confident team. And the 49ers, they're a little unproven, at least on the other side of the ball, and let's kind of switch to that side then. I think all the big questions are about Jimmy Garoppolo. He's never made a start in the postseason before. And with Cousins on a hot streak now, can Jimmy G come up with enough big plays in this one? If the 49ers lose and he plays poorly, there's going to be a ton of questions about his long-term future with the team. The Niners play a very similar type of game. Their offense, I'd say, is a little more creative, but the general idea is they're more of a run-first team as well. They use the run to set up the pass, but they might have more dangerous receivers. So it should be a pretty good game between two teams with similar philosophies. In the end, though, I think the 49ers are the more talented team. Playing at home, I like their odds a little bit better. They're getting a full touchdown in this game. I've got a good feeling about the Vikings, though. Their defense has played tough all year, and I think they're going to make sure that this game stays close. And I think it is going to be high scoring, but I think there's going to be turnovers involved from both the quarterbacks in this one. But at the end of the day, I think the 49ers are a more talented team, and the Vikings will keep it close. They'll take it to overtime, but I think the San Francisco 49ers are going to win on a close field goal. I have the 49ers winning 34-31 in overtime, and despite getting a touchdown on the line, I'll take the Vikings +7. And as just a fun fact, in current postseason history between the two teams, the Vikings won the first matchup in the divisional round in 1988, 36-24, and the 49ers have won the next 3 games. All of them were divisional games, including 89, 90, and 98. Moving on to the late game on Saturday, we've got another 6-1 matchup, this time on the AFC side. It's going to be the Tennessee Titans at 9-7 at the 14-2 Baltimore Ravens. So for the injury report real quick, the Titans are going to be without receiver Adam Humphries and linebacker Jayon Brown, and their wide receiver Cody Hollister is questionable as well. For the Ravens, they have Mark Ingram and Mark Andrews, the running back and tight end. They're both questionable as well, but both are expected to play. This might be the most intriguing matchup of the playoffs, at least from a stylistic point of view. Both teams are dominant running teams, but they get their yardage in different ways. For the Titans, it's all about riding on the back of Derrick Henry, just like they did last week. The Ravens do boast the 5th best rushing defense in the league, but they're just 21st in yards per carry against. You factor in that they faced the least amount of passes or runs against them this season, most likely because they've been leading their games more often than not, prompting teams to abandon the run game. With that in mind, can Derrick Henry carry the load, and can he kind of put the team on his back, similar to the way he did last week? I think he can, yeah. I mean, the Patriots' run defense was suspect at times this season, and Henry and the Titans' offensive line came through big time. I definitely think that he can. But that being said, it only resulted in 15 offensive points. That's not going to be good enough against the Ravens. My real question comes from the other side, and it's can the Titans slow down the Ravens' offense? And part of it is going to be a rust factor. The most complete team in the NFL was so dominant that they were able to rest starters in Week 17 on top of the week they had off last week. So with that being the case, Could the Ravens come out slow in this one? Their last meaningful game was going to be 20 days ago from when they kick off. If they come out slow, how likely are they to lose? I'm not sure. It's an interesting matchup, like I said. The best way for both of these teams to win is to get up by double digits as quickly as possible. For the Titans, you need more out of A.J. Brown and Ryan Tannehill this week. They were able to get away with it last week because the Patriots' offense is anemic as well. But the Ravens had the best offense in the league this past year. No one has been able to stop it. Your best hope is to slow it down. The only way you can really slow it down effectively is to force them to throw the ball more. Lamar Jackson had the fewest passing attempts, I believe, of any quarterback that started like 12 games this year. I mean, he did not throw the ball much. His highest passing total came in week 1. So, I mean, it's easier said than done, but the best way to win is to score and make make them throw the ball, which is not exactly ideal because they still have the best offense in the league. So, not an ideal situation, but the good news is that if you can get up, Derrick Henry is the type of guy that, he can run against those stacked boxes. He's a guy that can help you shorten the game just like the Ravens like to. And even though Mark Ingram might not play, I think he will. Even if he doesn't, we in Pittsburgh saw just how effective running back Gus Edwards can be on the ground as well. That's not a huge drop-off from a pure running standpoint. So just because Ingram might not play does not mean that I'd be worried if I'm the Ravens. It should be a good physical game. I think, like I said, I think this has the potential to be the most intriguing matchup of the weekend. But that being said, I do like the Ravens at home. The Titans, they put up a good fight last week, but they're going to have to put up at least 3 touchdowns in order to win. And I have a hard time believing that their average defense is going to be able to contain Lamar Jackson, who's had an extra week off to prepare for this game. Titans will put up a good fight, but I think the Ravens' offense is too much for the Titans to slow down, and eventually they'll have to play catch-up, and that'll go right into the Ravens' defensive hands, as it has all season. So give me the Ravens to cover a 10-point spread by winning 38-24. On to Sunday's games now. Starting with the 1 o'clock game, you have the 4-seeded Texans at 10-6 at the 2-seeded Chiefs, who are 12-4. Longer list of injuries for the Houston Texans. They include safety Jali Adai, tight end Jordan Akins, tight end Darren Fells, wide receivers Will Fuller and Kenny Stills, and cornerbacks Keon Crossan and Jonathan Joseph. So they're all questionable. It's a bunch of guys there. And for the Chiefs, they have 3 injuries. One is cornerback Morris Claiborne, who's out, and tight end Travis Kelce, who's questionable, and defensive lineman Chris Jones, who's also questionable. For Houston, they were probably the most interesting team in terms of playing, in terms of consistency coming out of Wild Card Weekend. As they have all year, they were very inconsistent. They started very slowly against the Bills last week. Were down 16-0. Came back, tied the game, were looking great, and then they kind of muddled through overtime for the first 10 minutes, and then they got the ball, and Deshaun Watson makes a great play to Tywan Jones, and they're able to escape with a win. I'm not sure that the Texans are going to be able to go in and win this game, but you have to remember they won in Arrowhead Stadium earlier this season. Winning there again is definitely not out of the realm of possibility. Can they do it again? Of course they can. Deshaun Watson really is the great equalizer for that team. That guy can make plays I feel like I've only seen Russell Wilson make lately. He's the type of guy that can really do it all. And if the Chiefs' defense is not careful, he's going to be able to pull the rabbit out of the hat again. And it's hard to bet against Deshaun Watson, even with the poor offensive line, and even with that Texans' horrible defense. It's hard to pick against Deshaun Watson right now. Even when he does struggle, he still manages to put together the big plays, and that's a quality that you love to have in a quarterback. On the other side, you have Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, who probably are feeling better about where they are right now than they were a year ago. Even though a year ago they were the number 1 seed in the AFC, they have the feeling of a much more complete team this year And just, even though they lost safety Juan Thornhill for the rest of the season and they're without Morris Claiborne, they are dealing with injuries on the defensive side. But this is a defense that's come around over the second half of the season. Can they sustain this in the playoffs, now playing against a talented Texans offense? They're going to have to get after Deshaun Watson if they want to win this game. They'll probably have a good chance of shutting down the Texans' running attack, but that didn't do a whole lot for the Bills last week once push came to shove. So they're going to have to be able to contain the Texans for the entire game, and I think they'll have an opportunity to do so, but as we saw last week, it takes just 2 or 3 plays that Watson can make with his legs and then his arm to change the game. So this Kansas City Chiefs defense is going to be truly tested in the most important time of the season. On the other side, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense, I really like their matchup here. I think they could score a boatload of points. I'm least impressed with the Texans defense of pretty much any unit in the rest of the playoffs here. So I think this could be a big game for Mahomes and the Chiefs. Kansas City's getting a 10-point spread at home here. I mentioned I love the Chiefs' offensive matchup here. Even though I think the Chiefs' defense is improved, it's hard for me to bet against Deshaun Watson. I think they'll put up a good amount of points as well. Give me the Chiefs to win 35-27 as the Chiefs move on to the AFC Championship game for the second year in a row. And the late game, the final game of the weekend, the number 5 seed Seattle Seahawks at 11-5 at the Green Bay Packers, who are the number 2 seed at 13-3. Longer injury lists here for both teams. I'll start with the Packers. They have 4 questionable players, and defensive lineman Kenny Clark, fullback Danny Vitale, running back Dexter Williams, and defensive lineman Tyler Lancaster. And on the other side, the Seattle Seahawks are dealing with injuries to defensive tackle Quentin Jefferson, safety Marquise Blair, tackle George Fant, tackle Dwayne Brown, defensive end Ziggy Ansah. They're all questionable, and guard Mikey Potty is doubtful with a neck injury as well. So, man, there's a lot of injuries on the Seahawks side. That's not ideal. But for Seattle, the story of the season has been winning close games. They have not won a game this season by more than 8 points, including their win last week against the Eagles. Is there any chance that catches up to them against a 13-win Packers team that is both rested and at home? Meanwhile, the Seahawks seem to be the more banged-up team on the road. You know, I wasn't a believer in the Seahawks last week, but they proved me wrong. And I know that the injury to Carson Wentz played a big part of that. But the Seahawks, man, they're just a band of fighters. And you have to be proud of the way that they've played, even if you don't love the team, the way that they've played this year with the injuries. And even though they've played in a lot of close games, you have to respect that. And winning games like that can become contagious because when you get in those close situations, you believe that you're going to be able to win those games all the time. And so far this year, they've been able to do it. And they can definitely do it again because the Green Bay Packers have been far from invincible. They might be the least impressive 13-win team I've ever seen. It's very bizarre the way things have worked out for them. You know, you just don't think about the Green Bay Packers as a team that won 13 games this year. I didn't even realize, they kind of snuck in as the number 2 seed. Teams don't sneak in to be the number 2 seed in the playoffs. That's just not how that works. It's very, very bizarre. But in any case, In any case, sorry. As far as the preview goes, the Packers' defense has been very strange this year. They're an opportunistic defense, but they've given up a ton of yardage. I just don't trust the Seahawks' rushing attack right now. They've got Lynch, Turbin, and Travis Homer. I'm just not a big believer in that team right now, and they've got all the injuries along the offensive line, even if they do play. Zadarius Smith, Adrian Amos, Preston Smith. I like the Packers' defense in this one, and on the other side, I was not a believer in the Seahawks' defense anyways. They gave up 9 points to the Seahawks last week, but Carson Wentz got hurt, and Josh McCown played with, a torn hamstring or something, and he's 41. Okay, give me a break. I'm still not a believer in this defense. Even if Aaron Rodgers had a down year this year, even if there's really no one on offense besides Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams, I like the Packers for a good opportunity to put up, at least 3 or more touchdowns. Nobody's buying any stock on the Packers. They've won 13 games this year. I like their chances in this one. I think that this is a sneaky good team, and I know that they might not be the sexy pick, but I think that they're looking and seeing how no one's believing in them, and I think that they're going to put up a pretty good fight in this one. So I like the Packers in this one. They're 4-point favorites at home, but I think they're going to win 27-20. So give me the Packers to advance to the NFC Championship game. So in total, or in conclusion, I have championship weekend setting up to be the Ravens and the Ravens, the Chiefs, the 49ers, and the Packers. So I have straight chalk this week. I mean, hopefully there's an upset somewhere, but that's kind of how I see it breaking down right now. And just like last week, I'm going to rank all the starting quarterbacks. Just going to come in right off the bat and say that I was wrong last week. I was wrong about Kirk Cousins and putting him in 8th place. He proved me wrong, and I'm very sorry about that. So I'm going to start off my list of 8 quarterbacks this week. Number 1, I have to have Lamar Jackson. He's the MVP of the league, and he was the best player in the NFL this season, so he has to be number 1. Number 2, I have Deshaun Watson. He was not great at times last week, but he played great when he had to play great, and the Texans rode him to victory on last Saturday, and I think that his upside is as good as any quarterback in the NFL. Third, I'm going to have Russell Wilson. I know I just kind of dumped on the Seahawks a bit, but I still think he might be the best quarterback in terms of passing and running in the NFL. A lot of these older and younger quarterbacks, there's a lot of good younger and older quarterbacks, but he's kind of the bridge between them. And he's been doing it for a while. I like Russell Wilson at number 3. At number 4, I'm going to have last year's MVP and Patrick Mahomes, mostly just because he hasn't played yet, and because, I don't know, I had to put him somewhere, and I just didn't want to. I wanted to have guys that played last week ahead of him for now, but I mean, obviously that probably is wrong to put him as the 4th best. 5th, I'm going to have Kirk Cousins. I really wanted to put him higher because of the way he played last week, but this will have to do for now. If he does it again this week, he'll certainly find himself near the top of the leaderboard, but I have Kirk Cousins at 5th. Aaron Rodgers, yes, Aaron Rodgers. I have 6th and behind Kirk Cousins. Have I lost my mind? Probably, but this has been a bit of a down year for Aaron Rodgers. But that being said, I still think he's obviously one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and, it's still Aaron Rodgers. 7th, I have Ryan Tannehill. He only threw for 71 yards last week. I understand that was a really tough defense, but I was hoping for a little more than that. It's going to take much bigger game for the Titans to win this week. So his back is against the wall. It's time to produce. Last, I have Jimmy Garoppolo, simply because he is as unproven as any of these guys. I mean, he's more unproven than any of them. First playoff start coming up. The book has yet to be written, and there's a lot on the line for Garoppolo's legacy, and he could find himself at the top of this list in 3-4 weeks. But until then, with nothing to go off of, I'm going to have to put him in last. The matchup I'm looking forward to most, by the way, Vikings at 49ers. I love the way the Vikings played last week, and I think the Niners, while the most complete team in the NFC, remaining anyways, I think that if there's a game that the Niners could lose on the way to the Super Bowl, it's going to be this one. And the worst one I have is just Titans-Ravens, just 2 teams that are going to be not necessarily boring per se. I just think that has the biggest chance of getting out of hand, so that's why I have Ravens-Titans as the worst. My 8 X factors, 1 per team. I'll run through them real quick. For the Vikings, I have Adam Thielen. He's not healthy right now, but in order for the Vikings to win, they're going to need to get big plays from the passing game, and he was the big contributor last week. So Adam Thielen for Minnesota for me. For the San Francisco 49ers, I'll take linebacker Quan Alexander coming off of IR. This dude is an athletic freak. He can make plays all over the field, and they're going to need him against the Vikings and their powerful running attack. It's going to be a big day for Quan Alexander if the Niners are going to win. Similarly, I have Rashaan Evans to try to slow down the Baltimore Ravens' potent rushing attack he's going to have to be all over the field just like he was last week, and he's going to need to make a few plays as well. For the Ravens, I'm going to go with a similar type of player, but this time it's Brandon Williams, the defensive tackle, to try to slow down the big man in Derrick Henry. Last week I made Danny Shelton, the Patriots defensive tackle, my X factor for the New England Patriots. This week it's going to be Brandon Williams. You know Derrick Henry's getting the ball. You got to stop him now. For Houston, I'm going to go with J.J. Watt, defensive end. He had a huge sack last week that set up really was the turning point for the Houston Texans. They went down and scored and were able to kind of cut into the Bills' lead at that point. So I think it'll be a big for him. For the Kansas City Chiefs, I have Tyreek Hill. I made it no secret that I'm not a big believer in the Houston Texans defense outside of J.J. Watt. And I think Tyreek Hill could have a huge game, whoever he's matched up against. I think him and Mahomes could have a huge connection in this one, and the Texans are going to have to find a way to shut him down. The Seattle Seahawks, I have DK Metcalf. Coming off a career game, Metcalf really was the MVP of that game against the Philadelphia Eagles last week, and he's going to have another big game, as I think the Seahawks are going to have trouble running the ball, and they're going to have trouble giving Russell Wilson time in the pocket back there. And last, it's either Kevin King or Jair Alexander, whoever ends up on Metcalf. King, I think, is the number one quarterback from what I can tell, but maybe they'll like the younger, probably more athletic player in Jair Alexander instead. So, in total, I have Adam Thielen, Quan Alexander, Rashaan Evans, Brandon Williams, J.J. Watt, Tyreek Hill, DK Metcalf, and either Kevin King or Jair Alexander. So, through 1 week as far as our bracket goes, I am looking terrible. I picked all 4 of the wrong winners from last weekend, so I'm already in rough shape, especially when you consider that my Super Bowl champion is out in the New Orleans Saints. Austin ain't looking too good either, but he's looking much better than I am. His Super Bowl champion is also out in the New Orleans Saints, but he still got 2 games right last week, so it's been a rough year for my picks, and this past week was no different. Hopefully it's different for me this week, yay. Hopefully, I guess. But obviously I'm not expecting a whole lot. But I'm hoping that we can expect some good games, some pretty good matchups. And this will be the last time we have football on Saturday. College Football National Championship is on Monday. And, next week we'll just have 2 NFL games to worry about. Then we'll have the Pro Bowl, then the Super Bowl, and then we'll have XFL. The XFL starts, I think, a month from tomorrow. So, we'll be rolling right along here. So, in any case, thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. Again, this is Season 4, Episode 59. Appreciate the listeners, as always. And if you have any questions about the show, please feel free to email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. And check out our website, strongerthansteelnfl.blogspot.com. You can find our episodes on SoundCloud and YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a great night and enjoy the games this weekend.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.